Good morning, boys and girls. We're back for another edition of COVID Computer Camp. I promised we'd be going back to something a little simpler this week after our Robot Hunter game last week. It was pretty intense. So we're going to go back to some basics here, really basics. We're talking about rock, paper, scissors, which is a cool little schoolyard game that almost everyone has played. So it's something that should be fairly familiar to you guys. We're going to add some twist to it, though. We're going to make it an optional multiplayer or single player game. And so that's where the code's going to get a little bit trickier because we have to get... Well, we're going to be putting our own input in by selecting R, P, or S with our keyboard, or 1, 2, or 3. So we're going to be entering our pick, rock, paper, scissors, and then we're going to let our opponent pick at that point. Now, our opponent could be a real live player. They're going to be able to enter stuff with the keyboard, or it could be an AI player. And we've set up a little button inside our interface here. Let me show you what we got here. So I've set up a little button in the interface here that's called AI Player, and we'll be able to switch that on or off at any time during the game to let the AI take over if you don't want to play as player 2 or if you don't have an opponent available to you. So we've got the graphics all set up here. I've got paper, rocks, and scissors, and we're just going to be cycling through these things in succession as we play the game. And so when your opponent is getting ready to play and you've already entered your command, and it'll just kind of keep switching through it a little bit like a slot machine. It'll just keep circling and circling until both people have ended up putting their answer in, and then it'll evaluate. It'll figure out which of these two does rock beat scissors and that kind of stuff. Exactly. Okay. So let's get started with the coding here, guys. So we have a starter file that's available on my e-learning website. And so that just has all the graphics and stuff set up so that you can just start coding from there. It should have some of the sound effects and probably the variables as well. So variables are always something important to keep track of in a game. Let me give you a preview of what's going on in here. We've got a variable, 3 variables for each player. Player 1 can pick. Now that variable is keeping track of whether you've already picked or not. The idea is if I click R and then for rock, and then the other person clicks P for paper, and I realize that I could sneak in and go and put a scissors in there to defeat him at the last minute. So I have to make sure that once I've picked, you can't re-pick again until that round is over. So that variable will either be a 1 or a 0, just to tell us whether we've already picked or not. So player 1 can pick means we're allowed to make a pick. Player 1 has picked will determine whether we'll tell the computer that we have already picked and we're ready to evaluate our score right now. It's going to wait for both our players to have made their pick already before it goes ahead and evaluates who the winner is. And then player 1 pick will actually contain the words saying what you picked, rock, paper, or scissor. We're going to feed that into that variable. We have the same variables here for player 2, but we also have an additional one that's called player 2 done. And that will keep track of whether player 2 has entered their score. Player 1's block of code is going to control the program because the default is to have 1 player, right? And so player 2 needs to send an additional signal at times to let it know that it's done its work so that player 1 can go ahead and do the evaluating, figure out who won and who lost. It all sounds very complicated, but it's not. Let's get right into the coding here, and this will all make a little bit more sense for you. So we are coding inside player 1 now. Let's go grab a green flag from events. There's a green flag right now. Let me just grab it. And we'll magnify the screen a little bit for an easier view for you guys at home. All right, when green flag clicked, the first thing we want to do is set up a starter position. I'm going to go to my motion blocks. And as I've mentioned a few times, you usually don't have to type in numbers because Scratch already knows that this is the location where the block is right now. You see it says -110, -20. I'm going to drag that and put it underneath, and I'm just going to demonstrate one more time how if I move this guy around accidentally, these numbers here update. And so that will tell you the current location of your object. Now, we've already locked in this coordinate, so as soon as I click the green flag, it'll pop right back into the place where it belongs, and we can start coding from there. All right, let's initialize our variables. We're going to go to our variables, and we're going to set player 1 score and player 2 score to 0. Player 1, or it's called P1 score, and we'll do another one for P2 score. All right, so we're both starting with a score of 0. We're going to get started with the code here for what happens when a round starts. Now, I could theoretically have had all the code continue from this point here and tell us and let us pick our first pick. But the problem is, what happens when the second round comes around? We don't want to have to click the green flag again to get the game running. So instead of continuing the code here, we're going to break it off and use an event to tell the game to start a new round. So I'm going to go to my events. I don't recall whether I actually have a player start round command in here yet or not. Let's add this in here. Yeah, we'll go new message called start round. So that will be awaiting the inputs where we're going to tell it whether we picked rock, paper, or scissors. So when I receive, I typed it wrong. I cannot live with a typo, so I'm just going to do a new command here. Start new round. The shame. Okay, when I receive start new round, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is initialize our variables for whether, so we're in player 1 right now. We're trying to determine whether player 1 has already picked or not. So we're going to set player 1 has picked. So let's go to our variables. We're going to grab the set variable command here. And we're going to tell it to set player 1 can pick to 1, because of course we are allowed to pick. Let me shrink this interface a little bit so we can see a bit more. And we're going to set player 1 has picked to 0 because we haven't actually made our pick yet. All right. And now we're good. So let's go grab a forever. We're going to start checking for keyboard inputs. We're going to start checking to see whether you've hit the key to tell it what your pick is yet. So forever, and then an if statement inside there. We're going to do a series of 3 if statements, one for each scenario. Have I picked rock? Have I picked paper? Have I picked scissors? So let's go if I pressed the button for rock, which is R. So we'll say if I press the R key. Now this is going to be a problem if you're playing a 2-player game, because of course the P key and the R key and the S key are on different parts of the keyboard. So when your opponent sees you going for the P, they will know that you're going paper, and they will of course reply with scissors. So to stop that, or to minimize that happening, I've made the keyboard input so that you have 2 choices. You can go rock, paper, scissors, or you can go 1, 2, 3. 1 being rock, 2 being paper, 3 being scissors. And that way your fingers will be close together. It'll be really hard for your opponent to tell what you've picked. So let's go. So we're going to say if we pressed one kind of button or another button. So I'm going to grab an or statement, which is right down here in the green operator blocks. And I'll say we'll go grab both of those different keyboard inputs. So we'll say here's key space pressed. I'm going to pop that into the hole here. And I'm going to put it in twice so that I can change it to 2 different things. Duplicate and then pop it in there. So I'm going to say if I pressed R for rock, or if I pressed number 1 for rock. Either way will work. So if I pressed either of those keys, what's going to happen? First thing is, and I forgot one other thing as well. We don't want any of these keyboard inputs to work if you've already entered a keyboard input. And that's why we're going to wrap all of these if statements up in another if statement. Let's go grab that right now. So we'll go to our control blocks and grab a second if statement. We're going to put it outside the first if statement. So that's going to go right here. If. All right. So we're going to say if, and we'll grab an equal sign. which is right here under the greater than or less than signs. Let's pop that in here. So we want to say if I can pick is equal to 1, which means I'm allowed to pick, then we'll go ahead and take the keyboard input. So if you've already picked, that variable will change to 0, and that will stop us from picking here. So player 1 has picked. We'll set it to 1. So if I haven't picked yet, that should say, player can pick is the one I'm looking for here, sorry. So if player 1 can pick is equal to 1, which means I'm allowed to pick, then we'll do our keyboard inputs here, and then we'll say what will happen when I press the keyboard. Well, the first thing is we'll set that variable back to 0 again so that you can't pick twice. So we'll say player 1, set player 1 can pick to 0, and that'll stop us from playing again. Now we want to tell the computer that we picked rock here, so let's go set a variable. We're going to set player 1 pick, which is the variable for what we're doing here, and we'll change that to rock. There we go. Now player 1 pick is rock. And now we're going to make a little sound. So let's go to our sound commands. We always like to give little sound feedbacks whenever we do any small action where we add input to the game. You don't want the player to have to press the button twice to know for sure that they pressed it. So a little sound, a click or a pop or a ding like this one will give some feedback to the player saying, yes, you successfully pressed it. So we're all good. And then the last thing we're going to do is broadcast a message, and that message is going to say player 1 go. And we have to type a new message for that. Player 1 go. And that will send us to a new stream of the program where we'll actually make what's happening in this window here match up with what we picked. So we should be seeing a rock there if we picked R. But first it'll go cycling around a little bit. It'll switch through these things a little bit like a slot machine. It'll keep changing them, waiting for player 2 to give their input. So you won't know exactly what they pressed. It'll just keep cycling through there until player 2 stops. Both of them will stop. Then they'll send messages to each other saying, yes, we're both done. And then both of them will show what actually got picked. It might be the AI doing the picking, or it might be for the second character, or it might be you, again, depending on whether you flip this AI player button on. Okay. So we've got the code working for the first keyboard input, which is an R or a 1. Let's duplicate this. We're going to right-click on the word if here. I'm going to hit duplicate. And you can see that now I have all of that code underneath my cursor, the stuff that was inside the if statement there. And I'm going to move down below the first one. I'm not going to click until I'm sure I'm in the right place. What's the right place? You're immediately underneath the other one. So if you look at my if statements, the inner one is lined up perfectly with the first one. Let's click it into place and you'll see what that looks like. So you see the straight line between those two. If I drop this in the right place, in the wrong place, you'll see that things will be off kilter. They'll be on an angle like this, and that's telling you that that will not work. So what's going to happen is it'll only let you press the second key if you press the first key, which is in fact impossible. It'll freeze your program and stop everything from running. So always have to be very careful about where you drop these things when you copy them. Okay, so for the second one, we're going to say paper. So let's go up, change the input to a P for paper. And the key can be number, so it's rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, so key 2 should be paper. Good. All right, and we also have to change what player 2 picked is from rock to paper. Good, and now let's do that duplicate one more time. The rest of these variables are all good. The same thing will happen no matter what we pick. And let's make sure this one's in the right place, right below the first one. And we'll change that input to scissors, which is the letter S here. And we're also going to change this keyboard input to 3. So if I hit number 3 or letter S, then all this stuff will happen. And the important thing to change in here again is we'll change this to scissors. For those of you who are spelling challenged, it's S-C-I-S-S-O-R-S, just like that. Beautiful. Now we're good to go. When we test this program, absolutely nothing will happen because it's really just setting us up to add that input. What will happen is our variables will change. So, okay, we're ready to test our code here. Not much is really going to happen. We're just going to confirm that when we press a key, the proper information is passed along to that variable, which is called player1 pick. That will determine what it is that gets passed on as player1's choice in this particular contest. So let's go ahead and click the green flag, and I will hit P for paper, and you can see that the variable changes to paper. Let's try it one more time. Stop, click the green flag. Let's press S for scissors, and there we go. Beautiful. And I can try my number keys as well. So rock, paper, scissors. So if I hit the number 2 key, I should get paper. And there we go. We're good. Okay, so now we're ready to start working on the player1 go script. And that is the part that's going to start cycling us through the different combinations, rock, paper, scissors, until player 2 has finished doing their response. And so let's go set that up right now. First of all, we need to start with our, we broadcast a message here called player1 go. So let's go to our events, and we'll receive that message, player1 go, right here. And we're going to just make sure that that variable that determines whether we've picked or not has been set. So we'll go set player1 has picked to 1, and that'll stop us, as I said, from re-inputting information after we've already started this process. Now we're going to use a repeat until command. That's a command we don't use very often. And that is basically a loop that just keeps running until the conditions inside the little hole here have been satisfied. So what we're looking for is keep repeating, cycling through rock, paper, scissors until both players have actually picked. So player 1 and player 2. So we'll need to grab an AND command from our operators. That's right here. And there we go. And we want to say player 1 has picked is equal to 1 and player 2 has picked is equal to 1. So let's go ahead and grab an so we'll go grab 2 equal signs, one in this hole and one in this hole. There we go. And now we're looking for the variables player 1 has picked and player 2 has picked. My magnifier's not running. Let me just get it going here. And let's see if I can zoom things again here. Oh, there we go. That looks nice. Okay. So we're going to say, we're going to look for the variables player 1 has picked. There we are. We'll pop that is equal to 1. Let's shrink this a bit. And we need player 2 has picked. And we'll drop that in here. And we'll say that's equal to 1 as well. So until these two things are satisfied, both players have picked, we're going to start cycling through stuff. So we're going to play some sounds here. Let's go to our sounds menu. We'll go start sound. Whoa, that was a red alert. We didn't need that. Here we go. Start sound coin is the one we're looking for. And then we're going to go next costume in our looks menu. Looks, next costume. And then we're just going to do a little wait because we don't want this all happening too fast. So we'll go to our control blocks. We'll grab the wait 1 second and we'll change it to 0.2 seconds. There we go. So now it's basically just going to start rifling through or sort of cycling through these 3 commands until it basically gets the message that player 1 and player 2 have picked. Let's see where those variables are right now. We'll make it visible. So player 1 has picked and player 2 has picked. There we go. Both those variables are visible. And you can see that player 1 is picked is 0 right now. That will quickly change to 1 when we're done. And then player 2 has picked is 1 already. We're going to change that just manually here. We don't want it in the code, but I just want to temporarily set that variable to 0. So that we can simulate what would happen here if player 2 hadn't picked. Now we can run this repeat loop. Let me just separate it from the rest of the blocks here. We're just going to run it once here just to show you what this looks like. And so we're cycling through all the variables until player 2 is picked. So let's change that variable to 1. player 1 has picked, it still... There you go. So as soon as those two variables were both set to 1, the repeat loop stopped. And that's exactly the way we want this to behave, so we're good to go here. All right, so once we get out of this, we're going to want it to just go a couple more times. So let's go ahead and grab a repeat 3 times. And then we'll do that same thing again. I'm actually just going to duplicate the code inside here. We'll go duplicate. There we go. So just going to go 3 more times just to finish off the cycle and make sure that at least something happens. Because if the AI picks, you won't have time to cycle through many of these. So we want it to cycle through at least 3 or 4 times before we're done. And then at the very end, we're going to switch our costume back to the proper costume that we actually picked. So let's go ahead and go switch costume. We'll go to our looks menu, switch costume to. Now we can't tell it here which of the 3 costumes to pick because it'll be different each time. So we need to pop a variable in there. The variable, of course, is player 1 pick. So because our costumes are named rock, paper, scissors, the information in that variable, player 1 pick, will automatically switch it to the proper costume. So let's go ahead to our variables. We'll go grab player 1 pick and we'll drop it into the hole there where you can pick what costume. So I don't think we've put a variable into that slot, but because it does have that rounded shape, that's telling you, yes, you can drop a variable into there. All right. Now, now we also have another variable called player 2 done. And that means that player 2 has finished cycling through all its animations. It's not just that player 2 has picked, but player 2 still has a few more animations to go through before it gets done. And we don't want to evaluate to figure out who won until like a roulette wheel or like a slot machine. It eventually will roll down to a stop and then come to a stop, and then you want to know who won and who didn't. So let's go wait until. We'll go to our control blocks here. We'll say wait until, and that's another conditional statement we don't use very often. That will just freeze the program here until whatever is inside here is true. So we're going to say player 2 done is equal to 1. I'll grab an equal sign and pop it in there. And let's find that variable called player 2 done. You know, notice, of course, that there is no player 1 done because the main script that's controlling stuff is player 1, and so we don't have to keep track of when it's done because it'll know when it's done. Now we're just going to wait another half second just to make sure everything is finished processing on that end. And then we're going to pick a winner. So the picking of the winner will be a custom block. Let's go ahead and set that up right now. We're going to My Blocks at the bottom here. We don't use that one too often. And we're going to go ahead and say Make a Block. So we're going to create a custom block that will just branch our program off. Let's go Pick Winner. We'll call it Pick Winner. It will send our program off to a separate branch that will determine who won the match. There we go, Pick Winner. And now tomorrow, we will fill in the code that actually picks the winner. Let's just go ahead and test our code right now, though. So let's maximize our, actually we can't maximize the screen because we're going to be playing with variable values here. I'm going to grab this set player 1 has picked variable here. We can't change that because that will automatically get changed to 1, but let's make it as though player 2 has not picked. So let's go player 2 has picked, and we'll change it to 0. So we're just testing our program right now. We're not actually inserting this code. I'm going to click on it once. That will change our variable player 2 has picked to 0. And now that loop should continue until we've actually made our choice. So let's go ahead. I'm going to invoke just this little subroutine here, the player 1 go, by... Oh, actually, I'll just start the whole program off here, I guess. Yeah, so let's click the green flag. And so I'm going to pick which selection I have. Let's go R for rock. And as you can see, it's cycling through the choices here. It'll keep doing that until player 2 is picked becomes a 1. I'll put a 1 in there. And so as soon as I click on this set variable, this should stop on rock if we're doing this correctly. Let's give it a try. And there we go, and it stops on rock. Let's try it one more time with paper. So let's change the variable back to 0. We'll click on it. There we go. So our player 2 picked is down to 0 again. Now we will restart the program. All right, so this time I'm going to say paper, P. And it's going to keep cycling through until our variable changes to 1. And then we should be left with paper. And there we go, and we stop on paper. Perfect. Okay, so our program is working exactly as we expected it to. I can go ahead and trash this variable now. I'm not going to need it anymore. And so tomorrow we're going to fill up this pick winner variable. It's just a whole, function. This pick winner function is basically going to look through all the combinations. So if player 1 picked paper and player 2 picked rock, as in this picture, we have to figure out who won. And there's not much science to it. We just have to say rock beats, or paper beats rock in this case, for example. And we just have to do it over and over again for every single possible combination. Then we're going to go to player 2. We're going to set up player 2 inputs. And we're also going to create an AI function here that will allow player 2 to pick its own responses. So we'll get to that tomorrow. Hope you had fun here today and hope you're enjoying this game. And I will see everybody tomorrow.